Good evening, and welcome to the third event in our Personalizing History series, Introduction to DNA Testing, the Who, What, Where, and Why. We're so glad you could join us this evening. I'm Dory Gottschalk-Fielding from the Seymour Library's History Discovery Center, and we have as our special guest tonight, Renate Yarborough Sanders. Our Personalizing History series is made possible through a humanities grant for libraries. American Rescue Plan Humanities Grants for Libraries is an initiative of the American Library Association, made possible with funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. We're so pleased to have Renate with us tonight. Renate is the descendant of formerly enslaved ancestors, enslavers, and free people of color. She authors two blogs, Into the Light and Genea-Related, and produces a mostly African-American funeral programs online database. Renate is a member of the National Genealogical Society, the North Carolina Genealogical Society, where she's the Publicity Director, the Afro-American Genealogical and Historical Society, where she's a member of the National Editorial Board and Vice President and newsletter editor for the Hampton Roads Chapter, the Utah Genealogical Society, and the Tyrrell County Genealogical and Historical Society. She is also a member of the Lineage Society, Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage. Renate co-hosts Let's Talk North Carolina Genealogy, an online platform and YouTube show, presenting genealogy programming and virtual events for North Carolina researchers. And she has served as a panelist and guest on numerous web shows and podcasts. Renate has provided genealogy education for George Washington's Mount Vernon, Norfolk State University, the College of William and Mary, and for NASA. Her research has been featured on PBS Radio and most recently in a National Geographic cover story and podcast. Renate has contributed to genealogical publications, and she volunteers as an indexer, transcriptionist, and photographer in the genealogical community. She provides coaching and consultation services for clients seeking assistance with genealogical research. Renate lectures on a variety of genealogy topics, but specializes in teaching beginning to intermediate research methodology and sharing specific techniques for researching ancestors of color, both pre and post-emancipation. She's a retired elementary school teacher, mother of 2 daughters, and grandmother of 3 beautiful granddaughters and a grand dog. And Renate, I will now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Dory. Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you to the Seymour Library for this opportunity. As I'm sharing my screen, I'm just going to tell you this is the second talk that I've given today, and in both situations, my name has been pronounced so beautifully and so very much in the way that my mother pronounced my name, pronouncing the T and everything. And so I feel like she may be sending me a message from heaven today that I need to start pronouncing my own name the way she gave it to me instead of in the very relaxed Renata, which is what I usually say. So thank you for that. But we're here this evening to talk about and have a brief introduction to DNA testing and talk about the who, what, where, and why. And I am Renate Yarborough Sanders, and I'm very pleased to be here with you. Now, during this session, there's one little thing I need to do. Let me get rid of these controls. And let me, excuse me, I do like to turn my video off while I'm talking. All right. So during this session, we will identify the 5 major testing companies that are used for genealogical DNA testing, and we'll discuss some of the differences between them. We'll examine different types of testing used for genealogical research. We will discuss the emotional side of DNA testing and identify groups of people who can benefit from DNA testing. And then for the last part of this presentation, we'll explore some examples of how DNA can be used to find or confirm our genetic relatives. Now, even though I have labeled these goals with the what and the who and the where and the why, this can often vary from person to person. One person's what might be another person's who. So I'll let you decide that for yourselves. Now, at this point, I always like to give a disclaimer that I do not consider myself to be a genetic genealogist. I am a genealogist who uses genetic genealogy in my work, but I'm by no means one of your expert genetic genealogists. I consider myself an intermediate level when it comes to that. And for that reason, this is the one and only kind of scientific slide that you will see in this presentation. I use this slide to kind of set the mood or set the tone and take us all back to our junior high, or if you're a little younger, you may call it middle school days, when we all learned that living things are made up of cells and that within those cells, there's always a nucleus, and within each nucleus, there are chromosomes. And when it comes to human beings, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. And within those 23 pairs of chromosomes is where we find what we're here to talk about today, deoxyribonucleic acid, in other words, DNA. So what is this DNA testing all about? Well, it can reveal ancestral and family information that we may or may not have known. DNA testing can help to identify genetic relatives. And if you choose, it can help to inform you of health and disease information. There are 5 major testing companies where people who are using DNA testing for genealogy typically get their services: Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, and Living DNA. Each company has its own website, and on that website, you're able to see what that company specializes in, which types of tests are offered. And in the cases where you see the red asterisk, there are health reports that you can order along with your DNA testing. Throughout this presentation, anything I talk about and any time I reference a company, it will be with regard to these 5 companies only. So let's start looking at the types of DNA tests that are used for genealogy. We're going to just review the main kind of beginner level DNA test, even though there is a range of other testing that can be done beyond the ones we're going to talk about. So the first one we're going to talk about is autosomal DNA testing, sometimes referred to as ATDNA. With autosomal testing, you are going to get results that are coming to you from both of your parents, approximately 50% from each parent, excuse me. Now, this type of testing looks at markers from 22 chromosomes plus the X chromosome. And it is best for identifying genetic matches within 4 to 5 generations. Some people will say 4 to 6, but I like to kind of play it safe. You will sometimes get matches that you share a common ancestor with beyond that, but those are not guaranteed. Autosomal testing is used to estimate your ethnicity percentages. So this is the test that you see all the commercials about that say that, oh, they're going to tell you how much Irish you have or how much sub-Saharan African you have or how much European you have, but it is extremely important that you keep in mind that those numbers are only estimates, and they do show you that yes, you have that ethnicity in your ancestry, but the actual percentages could vary from company to company or even over periods of time as the individual companies update their databases. Now, autosomal testing is available through all of the 5 companies that you saw on the previous screen. And what you're able to do with all of the companies is download your raw data to your computer, and then you're often able to upload that data to other companies' websites or to third-party sites, which we aren't really going to talk about in this introductory presentation. So for those who may be more visual learners, if you look over here to the right, you see we have a female testee, and she takes an autosomal DNA test, and she's going to get autosomal DNA from her mother and her father. And the same is true of our male testee. He will get about 50% from his mother and about 50% from his father. The next type of test we're discussing is the yDNA test. Now, the Y test reveals origins of your paternal line. It gives you what's called a paternal haplogroup. And what a haplogroup is just a group of people, a large group of, millions of people who share one common ancestor from tens of thousands of years ago. And so that's all the information that you're really getting from that particular test. But if you get matches that share that a particular Y line with you, it can help you to determine in more recent years the surname of a family that you descend from. The Y is only passed down from male to male, because females don't have a Y. Females have 2 X's, males have an X and a Y. And so the Y line is passed down from father to son, and a female cannot take a Y DNA test. As a separate test, this is only available through MTDNA, but with some of the other companies, you will get your haplogroup assignment along with your autosomal test. And so we go over to our visual, and I'm very grateful to visualdna.net for these graphics. So we see our female testee who has only 2 X's, so she did not inherit any Y DNA. And then we have our male testee who has gotten a Y from his father, who got it from his father, who got it from his father, and so on. I'm going to just say, I don't think it was said, that if you have questions, please use the Q&A function on the Zoom software, and questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Okay, so the third type of DNA we're talking about, or the third type of testing, is mitochondrial DNA testing, or what is referred to as MTDNA. So MTDNA is kind of like the opposite of the yDNA. This one reveals the origins of your maternal line. It's going to give you that maternal haplogroup from the tens of thousands of years back, and the closer look at where your mother's maternal line may have, you can follow it up, but the difference is you don't have the surnames that travel with it in most, but not all cases with the Y. Now, MTDNA is passed from the mother to all of her children, males and females, but then only her daughters can pass it on down. This is available through FTDNA also as a separate test. And again, other companies may include your haplogroup with your autosomal testing. The thing is, you won't get matching. So when you take it through FTDNA as a separate test, that's when you're going to get matching with people who have both on the Y test and this MTDNA test. You'll get matching with people who share that line with you. But on the other sites, they may just tell you what your haplogroup is, and that's where it will end. So we go over to our visual, and we see that our female tester has received that MTDNA from her mother, and that she got it from her mother. But our male tester who got that MTDNA from his mother, he could not pass it down to his daughter. So it stopped with him. And over here, you see again, the male tester got that MTDNA from his mother, who got it from her mother. And then, but his father, who got his MTDNA from his mother, was not able to pass that down. And then the final type of test that we're talking about in this introductory session is X testing. Now, the X testing is actually included by default with your autosomal testing, but the difference is given in how each company shares that information with you. So some companies give you quite a bit of information about the X, and others do not. And so that's something that if it's important to you, you want to look at when you're studying which company offers what. You're going to want to look at what information you would get about the X. As I already mentioned, females carry 2 X chromosomes, one that they get from each parent, and males carry an X and a Y, with the X coming from their mother. When I give you some examples of how DNA testing has been used at the end of this presentation, you'll see some things about the importance of the X. Here we have our female, and again, she's gotten an X from her father and an X from her mother, and her mother got an X from her father and an X from her mother. We see our male, he got 1 X from his mother, who got an X from her mother and her father. Now, there are 2 more things I want to just talk about that are important as you're deciding to take a DNA test. And one is the collection method. There are 2 ways that this DNA is being collected between the 5 companies that we're focused on. The first is by a cheek swab, which is basically a Q-tip. So in this, in the cheek swab method, the tester will use that swab or Q-tip to basically just sweep the insides of your cheeks. You'll do both cheeks, and then you will put that swab into this test tube that has a little, a chemical formula in it, and you'll tighten, screw that tight, stick it in a little envelope, seal it tight, put it in a little box, seal that tight, and you send it off in the mail to FTDNA, MyHeritage, or Living DNA. Those are the 3 companies that use the cheek swab. The other method is the saliva method. And in the saliva method, you're going to need to produce about a teaspoon of saliva and deposit it into a test tube. Now, that might not sound like much to you, but if you're dealing with an elderly person, a person who may be experiencing dementia or some other health situation that may physically make it difficult for them to produce saliva. They may have a dry mouth. There could be a behavioral issue that would make it difficult for them to produce that saliva. All of a sudden, that teaspoon becomes very challenging to obtain. This isn't a really well contrasted picture, but I don't know if you can tell that these are like bubbles right here. So when you spit into the tube, you're going to have some bubbles, but there will be a line that tells you that you have to have the saliva up to that line. It has to be all liquid up to that line. And so if you believe that that would be too much of a challenge for you, or for the person who has agreed to test for you, then you may want to consider going with one of the companies that uses a cheek swab. Now, I do believe that you can also reach out to Ancestry and to 23andMe and request a cheek swab if you really want to test with them, but that will then require you to take that extra step. And then the last thing, and I actually just added this to this talk yesterday because this is not a real introductory level thing, but I wanted to mention the chromosome browser, which I see I spelled browser wrong. I'm sorry. But chromosome browsers are tools that allow you to see the DNA segments or the sequences of DNA that you share with your genetic matches. You actually can see where they are on the chromosome. And so usually the way you get this is there'll be 23 stripes representing, each of the 23 chromosomes, but they'll be paired because one of the stripes will represent your maternal side and the other one will represent your paternal side. And then it'll show you using colors, where you and a match might be lined up on that chromosome. And what that's telling you is that in that place, you and your match, that is the segment or one of the segments where you've inherited DNA from a common ancestor. And so this would have looked like the one on the right if I tried to show you the whole thing, but I wanted to zoom in on it a little bit. So I'm just showing you chromosomes 4 through 12. And this is what we refer to as triangulation. So I have 2 of my matches and myself. And I'm able to see that. So all the gray lines are me. These are my chromosomes 4 through 12. And with match number 1, who's represented by the purple, you can see all the places where match number 1 and I are sharing DNA. And of course, there's 1 through 23 on the real picture of this. And then match number 2 is orange. So again, you see all the places where match number 2 and I are sharing DNA. But then you see places where all 3 of us are sharing segments of DNA right here. And so those are actual segments that if I know who our common ancestor is or ancestors, I can label those segments with the names of those ancestors. And then when I get an unknown match, and that unknown match happens to share those same locations with us, then I'll know that that unknown person or previously unknown person is also a descendant of the same ancestors that I share. Now if I had never taken a DNA test, I wouldn't want to be hearing that. It's a little too complicated. And then I just wanted to show you this. I know you can't really read it, but this is something that a couple of the companies are doing now. And this one is from 23andMe. This is my actual DNA showing all my ethnicities. And what they've been able to do now is to show on the segments where you are getting that segment of DNA from. And so like if I go right here to the beginning of chromosome 7 and I see, that match and I share that, and I can go to the beginning of chromosome 7, although right now I don't know which one is maternal and which one is paternal. It looks like it's the same color though. I would be able to come over here, and if I'm squinting, but I think that may be the Ghanaian, Liberian, and Sierra Leonean. That's where that part of my ancestry is coming from on that segment. I'm not talking anymore about that. Okay. So this last little part of what I call part 1 is to talk a little bit about the emotional part of DNA testing. I can guarantee you that if you take a DNA test, and if you already have, you already know this, you are going to be experiencing a range of emotions, not just when you first get your test results, but forever, because as time goes on, you're going to get new and different matches. You're going to get new and different information. You're going to learn more about how to interpret your results. And so you're going to have some surprises. You're going to have some things that make you nervous, or you might be nervous when you have to reach out to a DNA match who you didn't know about, who's close to you in, in the amount of genetic material that you're sharing. There'll probably be some things that'll make you very happy, but there will also be some things that may make you sad, that may make you cry, may make you angry or surprise you. And I really love this last one because it is also true, especially after you've been doing this for a while, that you're going to go experience some results and some findings that you're just going to have to laugh. You're just going to say, oh, that's just silly. That's just silly. I can't believe my great grandma did that. So just be ready to experience a full range of emotions. Now, while you are preparing or getting ready to test, let's say you've ordered your test, you're waiting for it to come in the mail. One of the things I advise you to do is to let your family members know that you are testing. Trust me on this. One of the main reasons that you want to let them know is because you want to give them an option right from the beginning of whether or not they want to be told about any information or any surprises that are revealed to you as a result of DNA testing. I would suggest that you keep a clipboard as you go around to your family, and that as you call them, that you really and truly don't try to remember who said what. Write it down. And if somebody tells you that they don't want to know, I don't care what you find out. Don't dangle it. Don't hint at it. Just don't tell them. Now, if they come to you later and they say they want to know, or they found out from someone else, you don't have anything to do with that. But if they say they don't want to know, don't tell them. But do let your immediate family members know that you are taking a DNA test. Also, while you're waiting, educate yourself. Do exactly what you're doing right now. Participate in webinars. Do a Google search for DNA videos, because all of us who teach, we have stuff on the internet. So you can go on the internet and you can find free webinars. Don't trust everything and everybody, but go with the names that you're seeing as major contributors to genealogy education. There's also a wonderful site called Legacy Family Tree Webinars. You can, for a small membership fee, have access to thousands of genealogy related webinars, which include webinars on everything you could ever want to know about DNA testing. And I have some webinars on there myself, but they're not related to DNA testing. So I highly encourage you to look that up. But do everything you can, buy a book or check a book out from the library. Make sure you're going to understand those results. And even the websites have educational components on them now, the DNA testing sites. Seek support or guidance before and after viewing your results. Now, this varies by person. I mean, if you're just taking a DNA test for the fun of it, you probably don't need a support group. But if you're an adoptee or someone with an unknown parent or any question about your heritage, don't do this alone. There are groups online, there are groups on Facebook that you can join that will have people like me in it who are going to support you and help keep you informed along the way. So reach out for that even before you take your DNA test. Now, once you do take your test and you have your results, please be prepared to hear from matches, because all of the DNA testing services have a matching feature. You are able to opt out of that matching feature, but of course, we don't really want you to, those of us who are doing this for genealogy, because the matches are what we depend on. That's where it all comes from for us. But if you know you're not going to talk to anyone, you're not going to answer anybody, then go ahead and opt out, but don't tell anybody that Renata told you to do that. But if you don't opt out, you have to be responsible then and check to see if you have any messages, check to see if you have emails, because some of the services have an internal messaging system and other ones use your email address. and please respond to your matches. Reach out to the genealogy community. A lot of people don't know that there's a very large and active kind of like online genealogy community that spans not only across the country, the United States, but also across the world. And so if you use social media, we're mainly on Facebook, but we're also on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Some of them are on Clubhouse. You notice I said them on that one. And some of them are on TikTok. So I haven't done those two, but we're out there. So just do hashtag genealogy and you'll be surprised what comes up, as well as hashtag DNA or DNA testing. When you get your results, don't let those ethnicity estimates change or determine how you feel about yourself. If you identify as white and you find out that you have 2% sub-Saharan African, you are still white. You are still whatever you have been your whole life, but you're just finding out that there's, that there's something in your ancestry that you were not aware of before taking that test. And so, yes, you should learn about it. You should educate yourself, and you should try to find out who are the ancestors that you got that from, but it doesn't change who you are. And just embrace whatever new connections you make through DNA testing. And please build a tree and share your tree, because a lot of times people, when they first see that they're matching you, especially those of us who are family historians, we're going to look at your tree, and we already know so much about our tree that we can look at your tree and probably figure out at least what line we might be sharing, so that when we reach out to you and we first talk to you, we would have, some suggestion of how we might be related. So please do have a public tree that others are able to access. And so we move into the second half of this presentation, and this is the part where we kind of look at the who. Who is it that benefits from DNA testing the most? And my answer to that is that everyone does, because everyone wants to know the answer to the question that you see in the center of the screen. Where did I come from? Some people feel more secure in that they already know the answer to that question than others. But as I told you on the emotional slide, there are surprises out here for everyone. So I would be careful in saying that I know everything about, where I came from, who's related to me, because I just don't think anybody can really say that, even after you've taken a DNA test. But a few of the specific circumstances that I do think of when people are asking this question would be people who perhaps only, have an unknown parent. Perhaps they know their mother, but they don't know their father, or they know their father, but they don't know who their mother is. Or we have generations of people that are US soldiers have left their presence, as my friend Shannon Bennett says, around the world. And you can spell presence whichever way you want to spell it, but they left some things behind in different parts of the world while serving in our armed forces. And so there are, people don't like the term war babies. I actually have a brother who is a war baby, but they are trying to find out now, with the advent of DNA testing, who their families are. It could be that you're like these gentlemen down here in the corner who are what we call test tube babies. They were created by sperm donors. And these three guys, through DNA testing, found each other and found out that they're actually triplets. And they are triplets who were created by the same sperm donor, but with different mothers. So we move into this final segment, which I like to call DNA Doesn't Lie. Now, this first situation that I want to tell you about comes from my own personal family story. As I may have already mentioned, I think I didn't mention, I tested over a decade ago with 23andMe. I think I tested, it was either 2009 or 2010. And at that time, Ancestry.com or Ancestry was not doing DNA testing. But once they did come along, their database grew very quickly to be what it is now, the largest database of DNA tests. And so I felt like I needed to eventually get into their match base so that I could find more cousins. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. So I think it was in 2017 that I took my Ancestry DNA test. And when I got my results, I noticed that I had a very close match who was sharing 377 centimorgans of DNA with me across 14 segments. I was baffled. I was confused. I was like, why don't I know this person? But my wheels were already starting to turn when I reached out to her through the Ancestry messaging system. Now, luckily, she responded to me pretty quickly. I think it was within maybe 2 days. And we started to share with each other. This was on, we actually gave each other phone numbers and we started talking on the phone. And we started to share what we knew about our ancestry. And right away, I learned that she was from Virginia Beach, which I grew up in Hampton. So this was like 25 minutes away from each other. And that her mother had grown up in Norfolk, which is right between Virginia Beach and Hampton, as had mine. My mother was also from Norfolk. So, immediately I'm like, okay, could she be my sister? But she wasn't my sister. That's not even close to being enough DNA for her to be either a half or a whole sister. And so I went to this thing called the Shared CM Project by genealogist named Blaine Bettinger to see what some of the possibilities might be for somebody sharing 377 centimorgans of DNA with me. And after I saw the possibilities, I shared them with her. We narrowed down the ones that would make sense because she's only a couple of years younger than I am. So like it may have suggested, and I'm not looking at it, so I'm not sure, but it may have suggested, oh, this could be a great grandparent, great grandchild relationship. Well, she's 2 years younger than me, so we were able to rule that one out. What I did do is I asked her to upload to GEDmatch, which is a third-party site. And I asked her to do that because Ancestry.com does not, especially at that time, did not have any tools for me to work with to try to figure what was going on with this match. And they definitely did not and still do not have a Chromosome browser. So she uploaded to GEDmatch. And one thing that I noticed right away was that she and I were sharing 147.9 centimorgans on the X chromosome. And I knew she wasn't on my father's side based on our shared matches. So I knew she was on my mother's side and I knew she wasn't my sister. So I explained to her that based on what I was seeing on the X combined with the amount of DNA that I was sharing, that I thought we were connected through my mother's father, which is my Hill line, which is a whole nother story in itself. So here's what I'm thinking is that, I don't know if you remember what I showed you about the X a little earlier, but my grandfather would have gotten his X from my great grandmother, which would have been his mother. And then he would have passed that X down to my mother and her mother, and they would have passed that X down to us. And because my grandfather, I just realized I didn't tell you one thing on that X. I meant to tell you when I was talking about the X that with the X chromosome, the man gets it from his mother and then he passes it down to his daughters and he passes it down unchanged to his daughters. But with the mother, when she passes hers down, hers has been mixed up and recombined because she has two X's that she got from two different places. So what I'm thinking is that the X he got from his mother he passed down to both of our mothers unchanged. And then it could have gotten recombined even more than it did, but if they kept a fair amount of it so that we, the match and I, were sharing 147.9 centimorgans. So that was my hypothesis, which actually turned out to be true. So here we are. Most people say we look more like sisters than cousins, but we actually met each other just a few weeks after this because the match, which is my cousin right here, she lives in Atlanta, but she happened to be coming home to Virginia Beach to visit her sister. And so I went over and met them. And I think you can look at us and tell that we are cousins. So let's see what happened next. I kind of jumped a little ahead, but we kept talking on the phone. We probably had maybe 3 conversations all together before we really figured out what was happening. So here's what happened. The next time we talked, I asked her if there was anything else she could remember about her grandmother because of what I was, kind of figuring out right here. And she told me that her grandmother had lived with her during her last years of life. She was her caregiver, and she told me they were really close. They had always been really close. And then she had like an aha moment. She told me that one day when she and her grandmother were talking, her grandmother told her out of the blue how she had once loved another man very much, but that the man had died. And my cousin, she said she didn't think that much of it at the time because everybody has like a boyfriend before they get married or whatever. But she then kind of put it together with something else that everybody in their family knew. It was not a secret that at one point early in their marriage, her grandmother had actually left her grandfather. Did I tell y'all yet that my grandfather left my grandmother? I might be skipping around here. Okay. So her grandmother had left her grandfather and their family for a short period of time. But at some point, her grandfather had gone and gotten her grandmother back, and he brought her and the baby back home. The baby was my match's mother. And she was born July of 1940. Now, guess what? My grandfather, who had also left my grandmother and my mother and her brother, he actually died in June of 1940, just a month before that baby was born. So you get it? Her grandmother was in love with someone who died, and then her grandfather came, got her and the baby. So it all began to make sense. Her mother and what is now our grandfather had both left their spouses. Her grandmother was pregnant with their child, but our grandfather, whose name was Daniel Hill, passed away, leaving the grandmother pregnant with a baby that he would never see. And as far as we know, her mother, my half cousin's mother, who was my mother's half sister, grew up thinking that the man who raised her was her father. Now, our mothers grew up within a couple of miles of each other in Norfolk. And you know what? They attended the same high school, Booker T. Washington High School, but they were 6 years apart. So they wouldn't have been there together. But my mother's younger half sister, because my grandmother remarried, my mother had a sister 6 years younger than her, same age as her mother. They were in the same class together at Booker T. DNA does not lie. And just to put some icing on that cake, so this is Andrea. And by the way, everyone you're going to be seeing in this segment has given me permission to use their name and their photos. So this is Andrea. This is her sister. This is their brother. This is with me. So this is 353 with, this is Andrea. This is her sister at 353 with me. This is their brother at 343 with me. This is Andrea's daughter, who shares 300 centimorgans with me. And this is their brother's daughter, who shares 257 centimorgans with me. DNA doesn't lie. Now, this next little story I have to tell you about, I'm going to try to talk fast because these stories take a long time. This is a client of mine who came to me many, many years ago because she knew me personally and she knew that I was doing genealogy work. She was someone who had been in the military, but and she'd been in the military for several years, and it came time for her to renew her passport. And when she tried to renew her passport, then some kind of an issue arose that was a red flag for the Army. And long story short, she came to me after having found out that the parents who raised her were not her biological parents, and her mother, who was the only one of the two parents living at the time, would not admit to it and would not give the client any information at all. So she came to me and she wanted to know what I thought she should do or could do. And I suggested, of course, that she take a DNA test. Now, she had already done some DNA testing with the Army and had taken them hair out of her mother's hairbrush. And that was how she found out that that wasn't her mother. So at that time, this was also before Ancestry was doing DNA. She did a test with 23andMe, but she didn't get enough close matches that could lead us to any kind of definitive conclusion at the time. And it was also around 2010 or 2011 before I even had the type of knowledge that I have now about how to build out trees for people that you don't know and how to work with chromosome browsers and things like that. So anyway, a little bit of time went by and Ancestry did start doing DNA testing. And I encouraged her to test with Ancestry as quickly as possible, but for financial reasons, it took her a little while to actually do it. But when she did, the results came through. And this was her top match. This person shared 1,894.4 centimorgans with her across 153 segments of DNA, and they were within a generation and a half of a shared common ancestor. Now, by this time, I had learned quite a bit more about working with the X, and when I looked at this kit, and I saw along with my client's kit, and I had everybody on GEDmatch, and I saw on GEDmatch that they were sharing 195.8 centimorgans on the X, and that's out of that total 196.1. That's all you have on the X is 196.1 centimorgans. So remember, I explained to you about how the fathers pass their X to their daughters intact. I knew, because I had learned so much more by this time, I knew when I saw this, what I was seeing here. I was seeing two half sisters who shared a father. So I reached out to the match, and she was a 21-year-old young lady living out in Washington State. And she, she's 21, so she's on her email and social media and all that. She responded to me the same day I reached out to her. I told her why I was reaching out. She was very cool about it. She gave me some information about herself, and I told her what I was seeing and that I felt that my client and she were half sisters sharing a father. She answered all my questions about her father. Yes, he was from New York. Yes, he was old enough to have been able to have fathered a child at the time my client was conceived. He would have been a teenager, but yes, he could physically do it. And yes, she thought he would talk to me. So she was about to just give me her father's phone number and stuff, but I was like, no, you reach out to him first and get permission to give me his information and give him my information. So the father called me the very next day. And after we had quite a bit of conversation, at first he couldn't, he was never defensive about it or anything. He was truly trying to figure out how this could be or who it could be. And, I narrowed the time span down to late December of 1979 through about late January of 1980, because the young lady was born a few weeks early. And somehow this man, who was 50 some years old at the time, was able to recall a Super Bowl party that took place in January of 1980 at his grandmother's house in the Bronx. And he shared with me that at halftime, all the adults that were there left and went to some bar down the street and left all the kids and the teenagers in the house by themselves. And according to him, he and some young lady had a little liaison down in the basement. And boom, we felt that we hit the nail on the head. The timing was right, the location was right, and he couldn't recall another, physical engagement that he had around that time period. He would have been about, I believe, 17 years old at the time. It was either 16 or 17. And so he gave me, it took him a while to remember the name. He remembered her last name, but it took him a while, but eventually came up with the first name. He had not ever seen or talked to her again since they were teenagers. And he lived in Oklahoma at that time, but he was from New York. So I went on, connected him with his obvious daughter. This is him, this is her. You can probably see without a DNA test that is his child. This was a picture I sent to him of her, and this is the picture I sent to her of him. He also shared this picture with me from his childhood, and I thought it was kind of cool that they both have plaid on. And then, they began to talk and build a relationship with one another. She's in Virginia, he's in Oklahoma, but she traveled for work. And so it wasn't too long, maybe 6 months or so. She was on a work trip that wasn't too far from him, and she was able to go and meet him. And as you can see, they are twins. So this was a real blessing for both of them, because unfortunately, her birth father actually passed a couple of years ago. So it was good that we, got all this done before that happened. So while all that was going on, I was still on the hunt for her birth mother. I really only had a name and hoped that the birth mother was still in the New York area. So I was doing what we do. We track people down. We use social media. We use intelligence, online intelligence services and things like that, trying to find people. And I found, who I thought was the lady, and I sent emails and Facebook messages and even left a voicemail on a phone number and stuff, but I didn't hear back from her for quite some time until September 8th, 2017, which is when I was on what was the last night of a lovely beach vacation that I was having. I had just retired from teaching, and it was my first time not opening a classroom during the first week of school. And I decided to go to the beach and get away rather than sit there and feel like I'm supposed to be opening a classroom. So I remember, I think it was a Friday night, I got a call, and this lady is asking me if I've been trying to reach her. And so I was like, well, who are you? And she said, well, you've been leaving me messages saying that you wanted to contact me about a family member or some genealogy. So I realized who I was talking to, but I was in vacation mode and I didn't really feel like beating around the bush. So I just asked her straight out, did you happen to give birth to and that's all I got out. She started screaming into the phone, and she screams and she says, yes, I gave birth to a baby girl on September 8th, 1980 at such and such a hospital at such and such a time. And then she just had like this short pause, and then she goes, where is my baby? Well, it turned out that this woman had been a teenage mom with lots of problems, including drug abuse and a really bad home situation. And so the baby had been taken from her and put into foster care, but it was a foster care arrangement that allowed her visitation with her child. And one day she went to visit for her scheduled visit, and they were gone. And what we now know is they had packed up and moved to Virginia, taking the baby with them. Now I have to be very careful here, because the client has made a decision not to pursue any kind of charges against her now 80-some-year-old mother that raised her, who has dementia. But I will state that the mother changed her name, or at least began using a different name in Virginia. And this young, poor, drug addicted birth mother didn't have the kind of resources necessary to be able to, find her child or find what happened to her at that time. And she wasn't really in the right healthy state of mind to be able to do so anyway. So she never knew what happened to her baby, and she never saw her again until they met in 2017. And so there they are. You can see now that this child is a blend of those two parents. They now have a very close relationship. They speak every day and they visit with each other several times a year. So again, I encourage you to understand that DNA does not lie. And then just very quickly, as we prepare to wrap up, another way that we use DNA is to help prove or disprove family lore, stories that are passed down in our families, or even the research that we do that allows us to uncover some of the stories in our family. And so for me, here's another situation from my own research where I discovered that my second great grandfather was a white man named Nathaniel Hawkins, who had 6 children with my second great grandmother, a mulatto woman named Anna Green. And all of my research that I did to uncover this was, it was perfect. I mean, I don't think it had a hole in it anywhere, but the whole story is too long to tell now. But I will just say that since the time of making that discovery, I have Hawkins descendant matches all over my DNA from all of the companies where my DNA is. And we actually have a research group now that meets, that's a blend of Hawkins and Haywoods, but these are 2 of my Hawkins, one of my Hawkins cousins, Betsy, who's standing, and then this is her daughter in the chair and 2 of her grandchildren in her daughter's lap. And DNA has been able to secure the correctness of my research there. And in another case here, you have 2 Yarboroughs, Hill Yarborough, the younger one on the left, and his father, the late attorney Yarborough, Charles Yarborough, who descend from the family that owned or enslaved my great-grandfather, Calvin Yarborough. I didn't think there would be any DNA because their ancestor did not acquire my ancestor until my ancestor was about 13 years old. And so I wasn't expecting to be any Yarborough DNA, but we wanted to just make sure we really like each other. We've worked together on the research and we have some further connections, which is why we're standing at my grandmother's grave. But we were able to do the DNA to prove that we're not genetically related. And that was just as important to my research. So in conclusion, please understand that DNA testing is a useful tool for genealogy researchers and should be considered part of your research toolbox. There's another misspelled word. By having as many family members tested as possible, we are able to analyze family origins, connect family members, and confirm or disprove family lore. We have to be willing to accept our DNA stories because DNA doesn't lie. I am genetically connected to every single person that you see on this page. And these are all relationships that have been discovered because of DNA testing. So now it's time for you to decide, will you test? Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I can try to answer them now. As I did mention, I don't consider myself an expert here. I'm beginner level only. And these are the ways that you can contact me. You can feel free to screenshot this slide or take a picture of it with your camera if you'd like to. Thank you.
And I see we do have one question in the chat so far, asking, do you recommend African ancestry DNA testing, what of the bigger sites are good for African American testers?
Okay, so I get this question every time I give this talk, and even sometimes when I'm giving another talk. I try to keep my commentary to the DNA testing companies that are specifically for genealogical purposes, and African ancestry is not one of those. And the reason I say that is because African ancestry's mission is not genealogy, it's something different. They do not have a matching service within their protocol. And so I can't say that I recommend them or don't recommend them. I can only say that you should study what it is that they have to offer you. And if that is what you're interested in, then go for it. But it's much more expensive than the regular autosomal testing that's offered by Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, FTDNA, and Living DNA. Those are the 5 companies that are mainly used for genealogical testing.
And I see a hand up with one of our participants, Judith. I'm going to enable you to ask your question here.
Yeah, I wasn't able to take a picture of your contact info. Dory, can you either email it or?
Yes, I can do that.
Yes, and I'll put it in the chat, but I think there's a handout. I don't know if it's already been shared. It should be also on that handout, but I'm dropping it in the chat right now.
And I can email that to you tomorrow, Judith, too.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Well, today I got an email from Ancestry about their inheritance. You familiar with this? Ethnicity inheritance.
Yes.
And I don't know how to use it, how to interpret it. I mean, I have a breakdown, but I really don't know what I'm looking at.
Yes. So I don't think we have time for me to pull that up right now, but what she's talking about is a new feature by Ancestry where they show you one circle that's you with all your ethnicities by color, and then they give you a circle that's your paternal side. Well, it's one parent, and a circle that's another parent. And then you have to figure out which parent is which. And so the email the email they sent you today is because they added one new little feature to that, which is that you can now edit they have parent 1 and parent 2. You can now edit that. If you're able to figure out which side is your maternal side, you can edit it to say maternal or mom or whatever you want to say.
That's the question I have.
Yeah.
I don't
So
know which is
it's
which.
easy, it's easy for like people who are maybe, mixed race, one parent's white, one parent's black or whatever, they can usually figure that out. But most of us, our parents are so mixed with the same things, that it's very hard to figure out which is which, but that's what they're doing. The Ancestry has no idea which is which. They don't know.
Okay. That was my question.
Yeah.
So how does this technique format relate to the chromosome browser? Is there any relationship or not?
I guess
really.
I would say yes, but Ancestry doesn't have a chromosome browser.
Oh, okay.
So you would have to have your chromosome browser from one company open. And if you've done the work, like if you've used DNA Painter, if you've painted your chromosomes, if you've labeled them the way I was talking about, you can label, then you might know this one's this, but that doesn't mean that this circle from Amazon matches up to the top line from somebody else's chromosome browser. Yeah, that's why we really need Amazon to have a chromosome browser, but they aren't doing
now
it.
You are with the North Carolina chat. Okay, that's you. I
That's
think I
me.
have that contact information because I'm looking for my grandfather who came from New Bern.
Okay.
And, but I'm trying to find his parents
Oh, okay. Yes,
who
I'm the
don't
same.
have his last name.
I'm the same person from the North Carolina chat.
Okay,
Yes.
well, I'll be in touch with you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes, we have another hand up. In a minute, I will unmute that person. And before that, we had a question that came in the chat from Jerry asking, saying, thank you for a wonderful overview. To understand better what we should do next, what website would be best to pursue? Thank you.
So, Jerry, I'll tell you, okay, there are a couple of things I'll say. First of all, there is a site called ISOG. I want to say it's ISSOG.net. If that's not it, play around with that a little bit, but I think that's what it is. And that, if you can get to that site, you'll get a lot of your questions answered. But the real thing to do is just Google. If you Google which DNA test should I take, it's going to lead you to all the blog posts and probably to the ISOG site and everywhere else that's going to help you answer that question. The other thing is, I gave you the 5 suggested companies and they're in the handout. Oh, you know what? ISOG is on the handout. So don't even worry about trying to write that down. I forgot you guys have the handout. So go to that ISOG site. But you really have to do the work for yourself and visit each company and see what it is that they're offering. Now, most of us do suggest that people test with Ancestry, but only for the reason that it's the biggest database. And one of the reasons they're the biggest database is because we keep telling everybody to test with Ancestry. But you want to get into that pool and find matches because there are more people there than anywhere else. But once you do get your Ancestry results, you can download, as I mentioned in the presentation, download that raw data, and then you can upload it to some of the other testing sites like MyHeritage will allow you to upload to them. FTDNA will allow you to upload to them. And there are also the third-party sites like the one you saw me using called GEDmatch. And so as many pools as you can swim in, to try to get matches in the net with you, put that DNA where you can, but then each company is going to offer you different tools and different ways of communicating with your matches. So you just have to kind of know what to do on each site.
Okay, and we have a question also from Yvette. So I'm going to open up the audio here. Yvette?
Good evening.
Hi.
Referring back to the previous question that someone had asked about the new Ancestry feature with your 2 parents. So I've been able to test both of my parents. Do you know if eventually they will be able to refine it, that they can break it down by parent 1 and parent 2?
That's a really great question. Both of my parents are deceased and I was not able to test either of them, so I don't have that option. I would think that you might be able to use your parents' results, though. If you just pull up both of their ethnicity estimates, you should be able to find, there's maybe hopefully one ethnicity that one of them had that the other one didn't have. And if you can find that, then you'll know which one is parent 1 and which one is parent 2.
Thank you. And
do they have the same? I mean, are they exactly the same, or is there even a tiny little thing that
no,
might
there's
be
a little
different?
bit of difference between them. So
okay, good. Yeah.
And is it still true that FTDNA saves their sample for 20 or 25 years?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I do want to mention, though, that on each of the testing sites, you do have things that you're in control of regarding your sample, whether you want it saved, don't want it saved, So I don't know the specific answer to that, but should also be something you take into consideration when you're choosing a testing company.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We also had a question in the chat about how people can get the handout and how they can view this recording. So the handout will be part of the chat, which should be available as part of the recording, but I can also send it out to everyone by email tomorrow as the handout. And the video will be posted through our website to our YouTube channel, and that will probably be a couple of days, and we should have that up and posted. So just check the library website and that should be up. Do we have any other questions? I'm checking here for any other hands up or.
I saw a comment by my friend Basaida Cawthorn White. I don't think she's still here, but I will read it because it is good. Another technique to use for someone who cannot spit is the artificial saliva method, which can be used to complete an ancestry DNA test. There's a YouTube video that makes the process easy using a saline solution. Also, if you have someone who is on a breathing tube, and I didn't even think about this, the sputum collection from suctioning the tube, yeah, I have heard this, will also work on ancestry DNA. I have heard that. So, yeah.
I have one more question.
Okay.
I have done both 23andMe and Ancestry. Would you recommend for any reason that I take one of the other tests? Any advantage?
Oh, no advantage at all, except for the fact that Ancestry has a larger database. And we do typically suggest that people do both Ancestry and 23andMe if you can afford it, because 23andMe does not allow uploads to other sites, and they do have the second highest number in their database. So yes, so we do recommend doing both if you can.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome. These are great questions. Thank you. And I'm glad I can answer most of them.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this information and these wonderful resources with us. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight.
Well, it's been my pleasure. And I can't believe I had 2 misspelled words, because this is not the first time I've given this presentation, but that one slide I did just rush in there yesterday. So I'm funny about stuff. I'm anal about stuff like that. So yeah, but thank you. And thank you for the wonderful comments in the chat. And you have my email address. So if you'd like to reach out with any questions, feel free, and I'll do the best I can to help you out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have one more presentation coming up as part of this series that I just wanted to let everyone know about. On June 14th, Angela Walton-Raji will be joining us with her presentation, Telling the Story That They Will Want to Hear. And we hope that you'll be able to join us for that presentation about writing your family narrative. And before you log off, if you could please take a moment to answer the participant survey that you'll see on your screen as you're exiting. We would appreciate that. And thank you to all of you for attending tonight. So
thanks, everybody. Good night. Thank you.